The auction had already started by the time Tilda realized her father had put her name on the list. She found out the way she found out most things in that house, by accident, standing in the wrong hallway at the wrong moment, holding a mug of tea that had gone cold. She heard her name through the gap beneath the study door. Her name, and a number with too many zeros, and her father's voice saying she'll do what she's told with the same flat certainty he used when discussing inventory. Tilda set the mug down on the hall table. She didn't drop it. That was the detail she'd remember later, that she was careful enough, even then, not to make a sound. The Fenn Household Charity Gala was held every November at the Shangri-La in Toronto. Black cars, black dresses, white tablecloths. The kind of event where people bid on art they didn't understand and called it philanthropy. Tilda had attended every year since she was 16, always seated at the far end of the family table, always introduced as Gerald's youngest before the conversation moved on without her. She was 28 now. She had a degree in accounting and a job at a mid-size firm on Bay Street that paid enough to cover her apartment in Parkdale, but not enough to matter not to anyone at that table. She kept the firm's books the way she kept her own life, precise, documented, nothing left unaccounted for. She knew what a number meant. She knew what it meant when one appeared next to her name. The number was $400,000. She thought, standing in that hallway, that she should feel something larger, rage, maybe, or the cold, flat kind of grief that arrives when something you feared turns out to be real. Instead, she just stood there doing the math. Her father's company was down. She'd known that for months. She'd seen the signs even if he never talked to her about the business, had read them in the way he'd stopped mentioning the Montreal project and started talking about restructuring at dinner. 400,000 wouldn't fix it. It would buy time. It would buy maybe 8 months, if the other creditors stayed patient. 8 months. And the buyer would get what exactly her. She picked up the mug and walked back to the kitchen and poured the cold tea down the drain, and stood at the sink for a while watching the water run. The gala was in 3 days. She went. Of course she went. Not going would have required a conversation with her father she didn't have the energy for, and besides, some part of her needed to see it, needed to know who it was, needed to look at the transaction from both sides of the ledger. The Shangri-La's ballroom was all amber light and low music. Tilda wore the same dress she'd worn the year before, black crepe, nothing memorable. She drank water and watched the room and waited. The auction started at 9. She was listed as Lot 17. An arrangement beneficial to both families, presented in the spirit of charitable partnership. That was how her father had worded it, apparently. She'd found the document in his email 2 days earlier, forwarded from an address she didn't recognize, and she hadn't slept properly since. Lot 15 was a painting. Lot 16 was a week at a Muskoka cottage. Then the auctioneer said her name, not phrased as a person, of course, phrased as a proposal. A year-long contract, a formal arrangement, details to be settled between parties, dressed up in language so careful it almost sounded like something else. But the room understood. She could see it in the way people glanced sideways, the way a few of them looked away. Her father was at the main table, not looking at her. Tilda stood in the back of the room near the bar and did not move and did not look away from the auctioneer and kept her face very, very still. The bidding opened at 200,000. 2 voices went back and forth for a moment, brisk and businesslike, the way people bid on things they'd already decided they wanted before they walked in. Then one of them stopped, and the other voice, low, no particular urgency in it, the kind of voice that spoke less because it needed to, and more because it had already decided the outcome, said a number that ended the auction. 450,000. She didn't look for the voice right away. She stood at the bar and ordered a glass of water she didn't need and counted her own breaths until she was sure her face was still doing the right things. Then she looked. His name was Morrow. That was what she heard first before she saw him. 2 men near her talking in that half-whispered, half-excited way people talked at these events when someone important had just done something. Morrow bid. Do you know what that means for the Fenn family? And something else, quieter. Does she know who he is? She looked across the room. He was standing near the far windows with a glass of something amber, not quite looking at the auction stage anymore. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Dark suit, no tie. There was a stillness to him that she recognized. Not calm exactly, more like economy. Like a person who had learned a long time ago that every unnecessary movement cost something. He was talking to no one. He was watching the room the way she watched spreadsheets, looking for the thing that didn't add up. His hands were wrapped around the glass loosely. On the left one, a scar ran from the base of his thumb to the wrist. She realized, standing there, that she'd expected to feel afraid. She'd spent 3 days bracing for it. But what she felt instead was something more like exhausted recognition, the sense of arriving at an answer she'd known was coming, even if she hadn't worked out the equation yet. She set down her water glass. She crossed the room. He saw her coming before she was halfway there. She could tell by the way he didn't look up but also didn't look away, just held still and waited, like a man who had learned that most things arrived eventually if you gave them enough time. She stopped in front of him. "You bid on me," she said. "I did," he said. "Why?" He looked at her then. Brown eyes, not warm. The kind of eyes that had been used for calculations long enough that the warmth had worn off. "Because your father owed me money," he said, "and he offered me an alternative. I found the alternative more interesting." She held that for a moment. "More interesting than cash. More useful," he said. "For now." She glanced at the scar on his hand, then back at his face. "You're going to have to be more specific than useful." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. More like the flicker of recalibration, the moment when a person realizes the thing in front of them is slightly different from what they'd modeled. "You keep books," he said. "I'm an accountant. I know what you are." He turned the glass once in his hand. "I have a situation that requires someone competent with numbers. Someone who can't be bought by the people I'd normally hire. Someone with no connection to my operations. Someone with no other options," she said flatly. He didn't deny it, she respected that. "1 year," he said. "You manage my accounts. You don't ask questions you don't need to ask. You don't speak about my business outside my business. At the end of the year, you walk away. Your father's debt is cleared. You get a number of your own, enough to matter." She looked at him for a long moment. The music in the ballroom had shifted to something with strings. "And if I say no, then I take the cash," he said. "Your father finds another way to settle, and I imagine your life gets considerably harder." She knew what she was going to say. She'd known it since she found the email, since she stood at that sink watching the water run. She was going to say yes, because the arithmetic didn't leave her anywhere else to go. But she wasn't going to say it like someone who had no choice. "I want it in writing," she said. "Every term, every number. I'll want to review it before I sign anything." He looked at her again with that same recalibrating expression. "Of course," he said. She nodded once. "Then we have a conversation to continue." "We do," said Morrow. The contract arrived by courier the following morning. 12 pages, single-spaced, written in the kind of legal language that was designed to look precise while hiding what it actually said. She read it 4 times. She made notes in the margins. She caught 3 clauses that would have given him unilateral termination rights, without compensation, and one that defined compensation in a way that would have let him decide the value at the end rather than fixing it now. She sent back a marked-up copy by end of day. The revised version came back the next morning. All 4 clauses changed. She signed it. Morrow's offices were not what she expected. She'd built a picture in her mind during those first days, something obvious, something that announced itself. A penthouse somewhere downtown, floor-to-ceiling glass, the kind of decor that said, "I have arrived, and I want you to know it." Instead, the car took her to a converted warehouse in the distillery district, 3 floors, unassuming from the street. The inside was all dark wood and industrial shelving and people moving quickly and quietly, nobody looking at anyone else longer than necessary. He met her in a room on the 2nd floor, a long table, a wall of filing cabinets, 3 monitors running numbers she didn't recognize yet. "You'll start here," he said. "Everything is paper and encrypted files. Nothing leaves this building. You'll have access to what you need and not to what you don't." "What do I call you?" she said. He looked at her. "Morrow. First name. Morrow," he said again. Final, like a door closing. She let it close. "Fine," she said. "When do I start?" "You already have," he said, and left her there with the filing cabinets and the monitors and the beginning of something she didn't have a name for yet. The first month was almost purely technical. She worked methodically, the way she always worked. Start with the structure, identify the categories, map the flows before you try to understand them. Morrow's operation moved money in ways that were genuinely impressive in their complexity. A series of legitimate-facing entities stacked inside each other like nesting dolls. Each one real enough to breathe on its own but connected to the others through a system that would have taken most auditors 6 months to untangle. She untangled it in 3 weeks. She didn't say anything about what she found. That wasn't what she was there for. She was there to manage it, not to judge it, and she understood the distinction, had always understood the distinction between what a number meant morally and what it meant mathematically. Numbers didn't have morals. They just balanced, or they didn't. These balanced. Mostly. There was one area in the Eastern accounts that had a consistent discrepancy. Small amounts. Nothing that would register on a casual look, but the pattern was there if you knew to look for patterns. Someone had been skimming. Someone close enough to the operation to know where the gaps were. She found the source in the 4th week. She sat with it for 2 days, trying to decide what to do. On the 3rd day, she knocked on the door of Morrow's office, which was on the 3rd floor, and which she had not been invited to until now. He called her in. He was at a standing desk, reading something on a tablet, and he looked up when she came in with that same quality of attention, full, assessing, giving nothing back. She put the folder on the desk without preamble. "There's a problem in the Eastern accounts," she said. "It's been running for 8 months. I've traced it back to someone with internal access. I've documented everything. Dates, amounts, method. It's all there." He didn't open the folder right away. He looked at her. "How long have you known?" 2 days. "Why did you wait?" She thought about how to say it honestly. "I wanted to make sure I was right. I don't make accusations I can't prove." He looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he opened the folder. She stood and waited while he read. He read the way she'd expected him to. Fast, not skimming, taking it in properly. He turned the last page and closed the folder and was quiet for a moment. "You could have used this," he said. She frowned. "Used it how?" "To improve your position." He looked at her evenly. "Most people would have. I'm not here to negotiate," she said. "I'm here to do what I was contracted to do." He was quiet again. That particular quality of silence he had. Not empty, not awkward, just a person giving weight to something before they spoke. "All right," he said. "All right meaning you'll handle it." "All right meaning yes," he said, "and meaning you're better at this than I expected." She didn't know what to do with that. She'd been operating on a baseline assumption that he thought nothing of her one way or the other, that she was a tool he'd acquired, functional or not, no more interesting than one of the filing cabinets. The idea that she might have exceeded something, measured against something, was strange. "I'll leave you to it," she said, and went back to the 2nd floor. She thought about his face on the walk, back down the stairs. The way he'd said better than I expected, without softening it into a compliment, just stating it as a fact the way he stated everything. And the thing she hadn't expected was that this, the plainness of it, the absence of performance, felt more real than anything anyone had said to her in a very long time. She sat down at her desk and opened the next file and told herself it didn't mean anything. The 2nd month was different, not dramatically. Morrow wasn't a man who did things dramatically, but the door to the 3rd floor was no longer a place she had to knock before entering, and sometimes when she stayed late, which was often, because the work was genuinely complex and she didn't have anywhere particular she was trying to be, she would hear him still there above the sound of someone else not going home. One night, she was working through a set of discrepancies in the northern ledger when the lights in the stairwell shifted. She heard his step on the stairs, recognized it now without thinking about it, and he came into the second-floor room and put a takeout container on the corner of her desk without comment and kept walking toward the filing cabinets. She looked at the container, then at him. "Did you order food?" she said. "You've been here for 11 hours, he said, not turning around. She looked at the container again. Pho from the place 2 blocks east. She hadn't told him she liked pho. She hadn't told him anything about herself, really, and he hadn't asked. She didn't know how to account for him knowing, and the not knowing sat uncomfortably against her instinct to keep track of everything. She opened the container. "Thank you," she said. He made a sound that might have been acknowledgement and kept reading. They sat in the same room for another 2 hours in silence that was somehow different from the silence at the beginning, less careful, less like 2 people measuring the distance between them. When she finally packed up to leave, he was still there. "Get some sleep," he said, not looking up. She stopped in the doorway. She thought about saying something, she wasn't sure what, and then thought better of it and left. In the elevator down, she stood with the empty container and tried to decide if it meant anything. She told herself it didn't. She didn't quite believe it. 3 months in, someone tried to break into the office. Not subtle. 3 men, side entrance, 2 in the morning. The security system caught it. She found out the next morning when she arrived to find 2 of Morrow's people she hadn't seen before stationed at the door, and Morrow himself in the second-floor room, looking at footage on one of the monitors with the particular focused stillness of a man calculating next steps. He didn't tell her to leave. She sat down at her desk and started work, and after a moment he turned back to the monitor and kept looking at the footage. And that was how they spent the first hour of that morning, side by side in the same room, both working, neither acknowledging what was happening out loud. Eventually she said, without looking up, "The skimmer you dealt with last month, was he alone?" A pause. "No," Morrow said. She nodded. She'd thought so. The amounts were too consistent to be opportunistic. Someone had been feeding information out. Multiple people, probably. Which meant whoever had sent those 3 men to the door already knew the layout, the entry points, the hours she kept. Which meant they knew about her. She kept this logic to herself for about 4 seconds. "They know I'm here," she said. "Yes," he said. "And that makes me a point of pressure," she said. "Someone they could use to get to you. If they could access me outside this building." He had turned to look at her. She could feel it without looking up. "I'm going to need to adjust my routine," she said practically. "I should vary my routes. I shouldn't use the same entrance every day, and I'd like to know if there are any other gaps in the building's coverage I should be aware of, since apparently I'm working inside a target." He was quiet for a moment. "You're not afraid," he said. It wasn't quite a question. She considered it. "I don't have enough information to be afraid yet. I'm working with what I have." Another pause, longer. "I'll arrange additional security," he said, "for the building and for your commute. I don't need anyone following me around," she said. "That isn't a negotiation," he said, and his voice had a quality in it she hadn't heard before. Not cold exactly. Something more urgent under the surface of it, controlled but there. She looked at him then. His expression was the same as always, the controlled, calculating face she'd learned to read the way she read balance sheets. But there was something else running beneath it. She didn't have a category for it yet. "Fine," she said. She went back to her spreadsheet. He went back to the monitor. But the room felt different for the rest of that day, like something had shifted in the air between them that neither of them was naming yet. The 6-month mark arrived the way midpoints do, quietly, without ceremony, until she was sitting at her desk one morning and realized that she'd been in this building, in this strange arrangement, longer than she'd spent at her previous job. Her apartment in Parkdale was still her apartment. She still had her own life, technically, but it had compressed, somehow, narrowed, until the corners of it were just sleep and the subway and the second-floor room with the monitors and the filing cabinets. She wasn't sure when that had happened. She wasn't sure she minded. That was the thing she kept running into those days. The uncomfortable recognition that she didn't want to leave the way she'd expected to. She'd built the year as a fixed sentence, a thing to be served and then escaped. She hadn't accounted for the possibility that the people inside it might turn out to matter. Not the people, really. One person. She didn't let herself think about it directly. She just kept working, kept her head down, and paid attention to the numbers because the numbers were always honest. The night she finally said something, it was raining. She'd worked late again. She was almost always the last one to leave the second floor now, and Morrow was almost always still on the third when she went up to get her coat from the hook near his office. She'd started doing this without thinking about it, saying goodnight, sometimes stopping in his doorway for a few minutes to talk through something in the accounts, the conversation starting with work and occasionally drifting, just slightly, into other territory. He'd told her about a building project he'd once started and abandoned in Hamilton. She'd told him about the accounting professor she'd had in second year who'd failed her on a technicality and then recommended her for a job a year later. Small things. Nothing important. But tonight she came to the doorway, and she didn't have a work question, and the rain was loud on the skylights, and he was sitting at his desk in the dark with just the monitor light, not reading, just sitting. She said his name. She said Morrow and then caught herself because she'd been thinking of him as something else for a while now and she was tired of pretending otherwise. "I don't know your first name," she said. He looked up. "You've never asked," he said. "I'm asking now." A pause. "Read," he said, like it cost him something small. She held it. Read Morrow. She ran it once through her mind and let it settle. 6 months left, she said. "Yes," he said. "I've been thinking about it," she said. "The end of the contract." He waited. "I don't know what I think," she said honestly, "about leaving. About what happens to the accounts after I go." She paused. "About what happens to," she stopped. "To what?" he said quietly. She looked at him across the dark office with the rain on the roof and the monitor light making angles of shadow across his face. And she thought about the faux container and the clause in the contract he'd changed without argument, and the morning they'd sat side by side while she'd told him she knew about the threat without flinching. "I'm not sure the contract was ever really about accounting," she said. He was very still. "No," he said. "It wasn't. Not entirely." The rain shifted, heavier for a moment, then lighter. "I want to renegotiate," she said. Something crossed his face. Not the flicker of recalibration this time. Something slower, more open. Like a door he'd been keeping shut for a long time, deciding on its own to move. "That would require terms," he said. "I have some," she said. "Of course you do," he said. And that was not quite a smile, but it was close. It was the closest she'd ever seen, and it changed his whole face in a way she hadn't prepared for. "Can I come in?" she said. He stood up. "You never needed permission," he said. She didn't leave at the end of the year. She'd like to say she made the decision cleanly, the way she made all her decisions. With full information, with a complete picture, every variable accounted for. But the truth was that the decision made itself somewhere around the 8-month mark, and she just caught up to it eventually. She came in one morning, and Reed was at the second floor table with coffee and a file she'd been looking for the day before, and he'd left a note on top of it in his handwriting, northeast column, 3rd page, and she stood there holding the file and understood, in the simple way you understand arithmetic when the answer becomes obvious, that she was not leaving. She was renegotiating. The new contract was 4 pages. She wrote the first draft. He changed 2 things. She agreed to both. She still called him Morrow in the office. Partly habit. Partly because she understood now that the distance in a name wasn't always about keeping people out. Sometimes it was just the way 2 people had learned to speak to each other, and some languages don't need to change to mean something different. What the year had given her was not what she'd bargained for. She'd bargained for money, for a clean exit, for the satisfaction of a ledger that balanced. She'd gotten something harder to categorize, a room where she was fully accounted for, every line of her, and not found wanting, a person who'd read the margins she'd left in that first contract and understood exactly what kind of woman she was, and said fine, like it was the least complicated thing in the world. She still kept the books. She just didn't think about the exit anymore.